He stood at the PX window, steam on the glass, watching Normandy's children by the chapel steps in December, light and frost. An officer scoffed, pressed him to move along his chapel pass had the year smudged, and the V-mail line was already cornered by complaints. He lifted a canteen cup as the coffee refill hissed, caught a ribbon of stove light, then palmed a spent shell. Maybe a bell could change the room. Quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back to Normandy's winter and one small bell. Normandy, December 1944. The wind moved through broken windows like an organ note, low and steady. In the mess hall, a dented coffee pot hissed and sighed. Near the stove, a V-mail letter lay folded by the fire edges, singed just enough to curl. Outside the door, snow held small glints, little coins of brass pressed into white, the leftover noise of a season no one wanted to remember. Cold enough to freeze a shadow, Carter muttered, rubbing his hands. Yeah, Thompson said, colder in the eyes. He nodded toward the street. A girl watched from a jagged pane across the lane scarf, too thin, gaze too old. Elise, someone had whispered. 7, maybe. Kid's been there all morning, Carter said. Like she's waiting on a train that ain't coming. Maybe she's waiting on us, Thompson answered and tried to smile. Carter poured coffee. You riding home or looking at it? Thompson lifted the V-mail. A boy's face gap-toothed, tucked in the crease like a secret. Both. What do you even say? Carter asked softly. From a place like this? Thompson folded the letter again. Careful. You say there's still a door you can open? They stepped outside. Snow cracked under boots. The brass in the drift winked when the cloud cover thinned. Carter nudged one with his toe. Scrap for the detail to pick up later. Maybe. Thompson hesitated. Or not. Not. Carter looked over, half a grin. Don't tell me you're about to get poetic. Me. Thompson laughed once. I'm just thinking. What if these aren't leftovers? What if they're raw material? For what Carter said, a sermon, a bell. Thompson said before he could stop himself. Carter blinked. A bell for who? For her. Thompson answered, glancing at the window. For them. Carter let the idea hang. You're serious. More than usual. Man brass. Like that, some folks would call it bad taste. Or mercy, Thompson said. Depends on who rings it. Carter looked back at the mess hall door, then at the girl. What would you even start with? Start with picking one up, Thompson said. A gust slid down the street, and Elise's scarf fluttered. She didn't wave. She just kept looking steady and cautious, the way people do when they're memorizing a face. Carter lowered his voice. You really think a bell changes anything? It might change the air in a room, Thompson said. Sometimes that's where you begin. Hope can ring louder than artillery, Carter murmured, surprising himself with the line. Thompson glanced sideways. You said that. I'm going to deny it later. They crouched at the drift's edge. The brass wasn't warm or cold. It was a temperature of its own, the kind that remembers hands. Thompson brushed snow aside, thumb tracing dull edges as if reading a line he'd missed. He could see the mess hall stove reflected faintly in the metal, tiny, uncertain fire. Kid's still watching. Carter whispered. Let her, Thompson said. Let her see us do something that isn't leaving. Carter swallowed. All right, say we try. You think the chaplain has a file? Maybe the Red Cross desk will dig one up. Maybe the PX will have a little hammer, Thompson said. Maybe somebody's got sand and time. Time, Carter echoed. That's the part we never have. Then we'll borrow some. Inside the mess, the coffee hissed again like a cue from an old radio show. Thompson lifted his head, listened, and then looked back toward the broken pane. For a breath, everything hushed the wind, their boots, even Carter's nervous humor. Elise's eyes found his. Such a quiet exchange, and yet it steadied something that had been sliding all winter. He could almost hear a future sound inside the silence. Not a warning, not an order, just a note that gathers people rather than sending them away. Carter nudged his elbow. Say it again. What if these are raw material? They are, Thompson said. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Yeah. He reached down. He picked up the brass and didn't let go. Steam fogged the PX window until the world beyond blurred to watercolor gray. Inside the stove clanked, the air smelled of metal polish and coffee from the USO canteen down the hall. Thompson had lined the empty shell casings across the wooden table, each one bright in patches where his rag had found it. Carter leaned on the counter, cup in hand. "So this is your grand plan. Gonna open a souvenir shop for angels." Thompson kept rubbing the brass. "Not angels. Kids. Kids don't need brass, they need bread," Carter said. Thompson smiled faintly. "Bread's gone by morning. A bell might last." Carter snorted, shaking his head. "A bell made out of bullets." "That's going to sound like bad luck. That's going to sound like a choice," Thompson answered, voice low. A few other GIs drifted in, drawn by the rhythm of cloth on metal. The younger one, O'Leary, pointed. "You polishin' or preachin', bit of both," Carter said for him. O'Leary laughed, the kind of laugh that fills silence when faith runs thin. "Turnin' weapons into toys now. Careful, Sarge, you'll make the papers." "Good," Thompson said, unbothered. "Let them print something quiet for once." The laughter thinned, replaced by the scrape of a chair. Someone muttered, "He's gone soft." Carter turned. "You'd rather stay hard." The room went still. The sound of the canteen's percolator reached them from the hall. Steady, patient civilian. Thompson didn't look up. He picked one shell, tested the edge. "She was watching again," he said. "The girl. Elise. The one by the window." Still Carter asked. "Every morning. Like she's waiting for proof we're not ghosts." Carter sighed. "You think this bell'll prove that it's a start?" O'Leary tossed a casing in his palm, frowned. "Feels wrong. Like using a wound for music." Thompson met his eyes. "Maybe that's the only kind that matters." O'Leary set it down. "You're serious, huh? Dead serious." For a while the only sound was the slow clink of brass shifting under Thompson's fingers. He arranged them again, edge to edge, imagining curves, imagining a tone that could fill the cold spaces between languages. Guy plan Fibao Luke, misunderstanding. Empathy, at 02. 10. Carter poured the last of the coffee, came over and set the cup near the table's edge. "If you're gonna hammer, do it before the lieutenant walks in. He hates noise." "I'll keep it short," Thompson said, and found a nail, a flat rock, anything that could shape sound. He took the first casing, balanced it upright, exhaled. The brass caught light from the stove, a line of gold across soot. For a second his reflection looked like someone younger or just less tired. He raised the hammer. Carter whispered, "Man, you're really doing it." "Yeah." The hammer dropped. A soft ring bloomed, thin but clear, curling through the steam and coffee smell. Every conversation in the PX froze for that heartbeat. Thompson paused, soot shadowing his face, firelight flickering across the black smudge on his cheek. His hand trembled once, then steadied. The first hammer fell in silence. The chapel workshop had once been a storeroom for rations, bare rafters, brick floor cold enough to keep the cans from rusting. Now it smelled of brass dust oil and the faint trace of candle smoke from the mass that never came. Thompson stood at the makeshift bench with Carter beside him, sleeves rolled to the elbow, both men working by the dim halo of a lantern hung from a nail. The bell shape was taking form, a child's handful of hope hammered into metal. The clanging no longer startled anyone. Even the pigeons in the rafters had learned the rhythm. "You sure about the word?" Carter asked, chalk tracing slow across the cooling brass. "Yeah." "Noel," Thompson said, simple enough that even silence can say it. Carter tilted his head. "You want the year too?" He nodded. "If we're lucky, someone will see it again someday." They worked in turns. Carter carving Thompson, steadying the mold. When the tool slipped and nicked the edge, Carter cursed under his breath. Thompson only smiled. "Leave it," he said. "A bell without a scar doesn't belong in wartime." From outside came faint singing Silent Night in French, the echo of the chapel choir across the square. The hymn seeped through the cracks like something half-remembered. Guy plan, Fibao Luke, misunderstanding. Empathy, at 03:20. O'Leary wandered in carrying a Red Cross parcel half torn open. The ladies sent polish again. "Maybe it'll make your miracle shine faster." "Perfect," Thompson said, eyes still on the bell. "We'll use it to smooth the inside." "What's that for?" "So the sound travels clean," Carter replied. O'Leary set the parcel down and watched them work. "You two ever think maybe this is what's the word, blasphemy, turning shell fire into church bells?" Thompson didn't look up. "Or redemption," he said quietly. Depends on how you hold the hammer. O'Leary stared a moment longer, then took off his gloves. Move over, he muttered and joined in. For the next hour, the workshop filled with a steady cadence, 3 men, 1 purpose. Each strike carried less weight and more meaning. The brass began to glow in the lamplight, color deepening from pale to honey, as if catching warmth that wasn't there before. Outside, footsteps scuffed. Elise's small face appeared at the door, crack eyes wide. She said nothing, afraid the sound might break the spell. Carter noticed first. "She's back," he whispered. Thompson nodded, didn't stop hammering. Let her watch. The girl's breath fogged the glass. Every few seconds she traced the air as though marking the rhythm. "We've got company," O'Leary said softly. "She's why," Thompson answered. No one argued. When the last line of Silent Night drifted away, Thompson lifted the bell carefully. "Moment of truth," he said. They all stepped back. He tapped the rim with a small rod, 1 light touch. The sound that came out wasn't pure. It wavered thin at the start, then grew into something whole. A tone that didn't shout, but filled the empty corners of the chapel, rising into the wooden beams. For a long second, no one breathed. Carter blinked hard. "It's different." "Good different?" Thompson asked. "It sounds like a prayer from the wrong end of the war." O'Leary laughed softly. "That's the right kind, then." Thompson ran a finger over the letters, Noel 1944 still rough around the edges. "Needs sanding," he said, voice catching. "Yeah," Carter said, "but it rings." The 3 men stood, soot and sweat mixing on their faces, a strange calm settling in the room. Through the crack of the door, Elise's hand appeared briefly, small fingers tapping twice against the wood, her own applause. Nobody spoke. The bell cooled on the bench, smoke curling upward like breath after a long run. Somewhere outside, the church clock stuttered, then stopped entirely. Thompson wiped his hands, leaned against the table, and looked at the door. Every head turned to listen. The sky over Normandy was the color of old pewter clouds pressed low enough to scrape the roof of the ruined chapel. The morning patrols had ended early. Even the officers seemed uncertain what to order next. In the distance, the sea murmured and then fell quiet, as though the whole coastline were waiting. Inside the church, Thompson and Carter stood over their finished work. The bell sat on a plank laid across 2 crates, its bronze surface washed clean, the letters, Noel 1944, catching what little light filtered through the shattered stained glass. Smoke drifted from spent candles, tracing soft spirals that almost looked like prayers trying to remember their way home. Father Andre entered, coat buttoned wrong in his hurry boots, leaving wet prints on the stone. "So it's true," he said softly. "You made a bell from war." Thompson straightened. "From what was left of it." The priest smiled wearily. "Then perhaps Christmas still has a sound. Guy plan, phi biolook pressure. Compassion, 10:15. They carried the bell toward the broken arch where the altar used to be. Soldiers gathered quietly, boots scuffing, breath fogging. Elise appeared between them, scarf wrapped twice around her chin, hands hidden in sleeves too long. Carter crouched to her level. "You came back." She nodded, eyes fixed on the bell. "You still want to hear it?" he asked. She looked up at Thompson instead. "If it can ring?" Thompson smiled, tired but sure. "Then let's find out." He gestured for her to help. Together they looped a rope through the iron handle. Her small palms pressed against his gloves, light as air but steady. Father Andre whispered a prayer, half French, half English, a bridge of words crossing the gap between weary adults and waiting children. The soldiers fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause at the threshold. Thompson counted under his breath. 1, 2, now. They pulled. The bell swung once, not high, just enough for the clapper to strike. The sound began small, like breath caught in a throat, then widened into a tone that seemed to travel through stone, through frost, through the gray morning itself. It was not perfect. The pitch bent near the end, wavered, then found its center again. But it was real. It was human. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Elise laughed, a bright, thin note that joined the echo. The priest closed his eyes. Carter pressed a hand to his chest. Across the street, soldiers on guard turned their heads. Someone lowered his rifle without realizing it. From the motor pool yard came another pause, the kind of silence that makes men remember what they've been fighting for. Justice number 2. The whole company stilled. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Father André stepped forward. For them, he said, voice shaking. For every name that never made it to this Christmas. The priest lifted this bell small enough for 2 hands, heavy enough to matter. He placed it gently into Elise's arms. "Keep it safe," he told her. "It belongs to everyone now." She nodded, clutching it close. The brass caught a tremor of candlelight gold over her fingertips. A draft swept through the broken nave. One candle bent its flame, nearly dying, then steadied again. A single tear fell from Thompson's face, landing on the bell's curve. The drop traced a clean path through the soot, gleaming like quicksilver. No one said a word. Carter finally whispered, "She's got steadier hands than any of us." Thompson exhaled. "That's why it'll keep ringing." They stood there as the hymn started again. Silent Night sung quietly by men who hadn't remembered the words since childhood. The melody stumbled, then found its way. Elise looked up through the hole where the roof used to be, snow falling into the light of the candles. She raised the bell, and without waiting for permission, swung it once more. The sound climbed higher this time, bright and clean. It reached the street, the barracks, maybe even the sea. Outside, someone stopped mid-step and listened. Then another. Then more. It spread like a signal, not of battle, but of peace. Thompson's voice was barely above a breath. "We did it." Carter nodded. "And it's louder than we thought." The flame beside them flickered again, throwing long shadows across the ruined walls. For a moment, the colors of the shattered glass flickered red, blue, gold, as if the chapel had remembered its own light. Then came the faintest echo, distant, uncertain, but there. Maybe a bell in another village, or maybe just memory, answering back. Every head turned toward the sound. The bell rang again from somewhere far off. Snow had drifted into the chapel overnight, settling softly between the pews like forgotten lace. By morning the men had swept it aside and laid planks across the floor to make a table. What had once been a mess hall bench now stood beneath the broken stained glass, covered with parcels wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. The Red Cross desk had been moved forward, its candles arranged in a crooked line that burned with steady patience. Children crowded near the doorway, waiting for a nod from Father André. The air smelled of wax cocoa and the faint metallic tang of polished brass. Their bell rested in the center of the table, gleaming like a second sun in the gray light. Thompson stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back, watching the line form. Carter nudged him. "You sure this is regulation? Hope isn't in the manual," Thompson said. "Neither's joy," Carter replied, smiling. The priest raised his hands. "Mes enfants," he said, switching to English halfway through. "Today we give what little we can. But more than gifts we give sound, the sound of brass over guns." His words echoed through the ruined vault. Even the soldiers bowed their heads. Elise stepped forward, cradling the bell carefully. The other children pressed close, eyes wide, waiting to see if it would ring again. She lifted it slightly, just enough for the clapper to move. A clear tone rose, softer than before, warmer. It filled the space like sunlight pushing through the frost. When it faded, the only sound was a quiet sniffle from somewhere in the back. Father André crossed himself. "It rings for all who still believe in kindness," Carter whispered, "for all who forgot how." The children began taking parcels, socks, soap, bits of chocolate saved from rations, each gift small but given with care. One boy with a patched coat clutched a bar of soap like treasure. A girl kissed the red ribbon on her package before untying it. A soldier crouched to show a wooden toy plane he'd carved from scrap, and the child's laugh answered like a hymn. The atmosphere shifted, war receding for a moment, replaced by something gentler. The men relaxed their shoulders. Someone started humming "O Holy Night" under his breath, off-key but sincere. Carter joined in, then O'Leary, and soon the sound of rough voices became a harmony. Father André turned to Thompson. "Do you hear it?" Thompson nodded. "For once, yeah. It's peace." The priest smiled. "Then keep it, Sergeant. Don't let the next orders take it away." Thompson looked down at the bell, reached out and pressed it against his chest. The cold metal touched his heart through the fabric of his jacket. He didn't ring it. He didn't need to. The warmth of the room was sound enough. Outside, the sky had softened to the color of pewter and cream. The snow had stopped, replaced by a stillness that felt like promise. The children left with their gifts, turning once to wave. Soldiers waved back awkwardly, laughing at themselves for doing it. Carter leaned near the door. "Guess the war's on pause for Christmas." "Just for the morning," Thompson said. "But sometimes that's enough." He looked toward the bell on the table, candlelight trembling across its curve. The flame reflected like tiny stars dancing on gold. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the weight of the rifle on his shoulder, only the echo of that sound, the sound they'd made together. The wind stirred through the broken arch, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. A new candle flickered to life, flame jumping from one wick to another as if refusing to go out. Thompson's gaze lingered on the horizon through the shattered window, where clouds thickened again over the fields. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, not from the sky but from artillery repositioning beyond the line. No one inside heard it yet. The bell's glow remained steady, the children's laughter still bright. Father André offered a final blessing, and just as he lowered his hands, the wind shifted, the door creaked open, a cold gust snuffed one candle. No one knew it was the last bell before the storm. The museum was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that holds its own breath. Light from tall windows drifted through dust motes, turning the air into slow gold. In the center gallery, a glass case stood by the old library shelves, filled with wartime relics, medals dulled by years, faded letters, a Red Cross armband whose white had turned ivory. And there, beneath the brass plate, rested the small bell. The plaque read, "Noel 1944, made from spent shells by U.S. soldiers, Normandy." Visitors passed in murmurs, pausing to read, then moving on. Only one woman lingered. Her silver hair caught the same light that once touched the bell 80 winters ago. Elise laid her hand on the glass. Her reflection looked back, wrinkled, steady eyes, still carrying the same question she'd asked as a child. "Can it still ring?" Beside her stood a boy of 12, her grandson. He tugged gently at her sleeve. "Grand-mère," he whispered. "Was this really yours?" She smiled faintly. "It never belonged to me," she said. "It belonged to a moment." The docent, noticing, approached with keys. "Madame Lefebvre," he asked softly, "you wish to see it up close today?" She nodded. "Just once more." He opened the case. The smell of brass and polish rose faintly familiar like an echo of snow and candle smoke. She reached in with both hands, lifting the bell as though it might crumble. It was heavier than she remembered, colder too. But after a few seconds the metal began to warm in her palms. Guy Plan, Fee Bauluk Remembrance, Gratitude, at 1955. Her thumb traced the engraving Noel 1944. The letters were shallow, now worn smooth by decades of care. "They made this when the world was broken," she said, her voice trembling. "And somehow it still sings?" Her grandson leaned closer. "Can I hear it?" Elise nodded. "Just a little." She tilted the bell. The clapper moved once, soft, uncertain, then found its tone. A single note rose clear but gentle, filling the quiet hall. The docent froze mid-step. Somewhere beyond the wall another bell answered faintly from the cathedral tower, as if memory had a voice. Visitors turned toward the sound. A child stopped talking. For a moment the museum became that ruined chapel again, candles, trembling brass gleaming against winter light. Elise smiled. "They thought it was only for one Christmas," she whispered. "But kindness doesn't stop." Her grandson looked up at her, eyes bright. "Will you keep it here forever?" She placed the bell back into the case. "Not forever," she said. "Just long enough for others to remember." Her hand lingered on the glass. The warmth of her skin left a small print over the plaque. The docent closed the case, gently sealing the moment inside, with the sound still hanging in the air. Outside, church bells began to ring the hour. Tourists lifted their heads, unaware they were echoing a promise made 8 decades earlier by tired soldiers who'd found a reason to create. Elise turned to her grandson and smiled. "Come," she said. "It's Christmas Eve." They walked toward the light of the doorway, their footsteps fading down the marble corridor. Behind them, in the hush of the museum, the bell caught the last beam of afternoon sun, its metal dull, its heart still bright. The boy glanced back once, just as the sound shimmered again so faint it could have been memory or faith, refusing to fade. The bell still rings every Christmas. The glass case caught the afternoon light, turning the small brass bell into a sun the color of memory. Visitors passed unaware of the woman standing quietly nearby Elise, once the child who held it first, now tracing the letters Noel 1944 through the glass. For a moment the museum blurred into that winter chapel, smoke candlelight, and the warmth of soldiers who'd chosen mercy over orders. Kindness doesn't ask for change. It simply remembers to begin again. The bell made from shells meant to destroy now teaches patience the way a canteen cup once caught light in a ruined mess hall and turned it into hope. Every December someone stops here, leans close, and listens. They say if the room is quiet enough, you can still hear a single note drift through the air.